Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Retain podcast on the GrowthAmped channel. We are joined by a special guest, Bradley Skaggs, who is the co-founder of Skags, a New York City brand strategy and creative studio with over 2 decades of work across beauty, fragrances, wellness, and human health. Trained as an architect, Bradley brings a structural precision to brand building that most creative studios don't have, uncovering the gap between what a brand actually is and what the world understands it to be, and then closing it strategically and creatively. With clients like Charlotte Tilbury, Diptyque, Estee Lauder, DKNY, and Morphe, to name a few, Skaggs has earned a reputation for turning commodities into icons, and Bradley leads every engagement personally, start to finish. Bradley, pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So much to unpack there, and such an interesting background pivot from your formal education as an architect into this world of creative, albeit they're both creative, but so different. So, let's open with yours and Janina's unique origin story, right? You guys founded Skags with an architecture background, a path that most brand strategists don't take. How did that training shape the way you think about building a brand identity? And what does it mean that you still haven't quite left the drafting table?
I think, well, there's a lot there actually, but not leaving the drafting table part is like I can't go to sleep at night still. I'm still like awake, a night owl. So that's the remnant of architecture school. But we both studied architecture. And I think one way to look at it is looking at a brand is in architecture school, you learn how to think spatially. And I think brands are three-dimensional as well. They're not these flat things that only read in 2D, right? There's a depth to them. There's a perception to them. There's all kinds of things that sort of push on the interaction with the user. But I think the real part of it is where it comes down to just how you start to think about a building with structure and a foundation first and a structure, and then you sort of decorate it. And I think a lot of brands, not all of them, but a lot of them, they build a very shaky foundation and they go right to the fun part of making it look pretty and interesting and all of that. And, or the ones who do it right, they spend a lot of time on their formulation, especially in the beauty space, and they get that right. And that's super, super important. But they're not separate pieces. They're very much connected and they influence one another massively. So I think understanding that you've got to build a very strong foundation that you build the brand on top of, and then build the structure you need to support it, then the rest of it can do anything you want. So that's kind of a little bit of the way we think about it.
Absolutely. So back to your architecture principles, right? Build a foundation strong and sturdy, and then you can always scale.
Yeah, you can always
So
add on, you can add up, you can do all kinds of things, right? But if that foundation is weak, it's not going to support itself. And I think a lot of brands that we find, at least, that maybe don't go as far as they could, or they get a certain point and they plateau, it's because that foundation isn't there. And I think a lot of brands also, not all of them, and I don't mean to generalize, but there's a sense that it's always looked at as a creative problem. And sometimes it is a creative problem. But 9 times out of 10, redoing the logo is not going to change what's happening with the brand itself, or rewriting the copy, unless you're rewriting it in a way that really starts to reflect foundationally what the brand's about. So a lot of our emphasis is on helping brands either uncover that foundation, what that I call the core truth, either uncover that. It's always there. That's the funny thing about it. It's just either buried or they haven't articulated in a way that it's apparent and makes sense to people. So a lot of that early work is to either find it or build it if it's not there. And then, again, build on top of that.
for sure. So you guys describe Skags as a founder-led agency in every sense, right? No B team. Every engagement runs through you and Janina personally. In a studio of that caliber, right? With the brands that you serve, what's the deliberate choice behind keeping it that way?
A couple of things. Primarily, it's the output and just having better results, honestly, because I think with a lot of agencies, and we hear it from, Yanina has experience in the big agencies too, and she saw it firsthand. And we hear it from a lot of clients too, who come to us, that they get handed off, they get promised the world, they get handed off to a B team, and then it's just constant back and forth, and all this time and money's wasted with things that don't go anywhere. And we decided in the very beginning, we weren't going to run our studio that way, that we were going to treat it as our name's on the door, and therefore we
Right.
have to be the guys that are at the front of the door. And we kind of work it that I work front of the house and she works back of the house. And we figured that whole thing out in the beginning, and it works. I think people walk away much more than they expected. And I think the results we produce are better that way too.
Yeah, I can see where that philosophy comes in because if your name's on the door and the customer experience loses you along the way, then that won't necessarily resonate. So, yeah, I can kind of identify that as a core pillar of your delivery strategy.
It's also something about when you're dealing with a founder who's starting a brand, it's a very personal thing for one.
Mhm.
And you've got to build the trust in them. And to do that, it's got to be this one-to-one relationship, really. It doesn't mean the team's not involved. They're 100% involved. But the fact that person can feel like they're talking to the founders of another brand, another company, it goes a
Right.
long ways. And that trust factor is huge, especially when you're going to ask them to do things that maybe they're not 100% comfortable with. Maybe they don't want to be, the face of the brand, but they need to be because, whatever the situation is, right? Those things come up where I just think that rapport is important. And if you layer in account managers and all these people, it just breeds disconnect. And I don't care how good you are, there's always going to be a disconnect. And I think too that sometimes when you get that relationship, you become a bit of a therapist too. And it's kind of like trying to walk them back from jumping off the cliff or giving up or any of this stuff. And you just don't feel that if you're not having that dialogue. So it's important.
Yeah, I can totally imagine what it does for trust, right? Because it takes a founder to trust a founder, and that founder to founder peer trust factor is so much more easier to, I don't want to say buy into, but to subscribe to than it is for somebody that's on a payroll delivering advice about a brand without having taken any risk on their own. So yeah, I think that's something that we can resonate with. For those that have not heard of Skags before, how would you describe what you do to someone at, say, a dinner party? And then how would you describe it to a CMO who's been burnt by branding agencies before?
The dinner party one is we run a strategy and creative studio. And that usually prompts the question, like, what do you do? And we do a lot of work in the beauty space. And it starts the conversation. The CMO, on the other hand, is similar, except there maybe you need to drop a few names. I don't really like doing that. I don't feel like I have to. But sometimes if the conversation goes on, it comes up, well, you guys work in beauty. Who do you work for? What have you done work for? And then that's okay. We'll drop it. Right. But a lot of it's just here's what we do and here's what we've done and this is what we feel like makes us different.
Absolutely. Well, also, I have seen that there's no harm in doing some name drops to show credibility and to show reputation that precedes you, right? So I can understand that angle, for sure. So when we talk about the industry landscape as a whole, the beauty and wellness category is notoriously crowded, and new brands are launching daily, and differentiation is getting harder. What's the dominant mistake you think brands are making when they try to stand out, and why does it keep happening?
Yeah, what's absolutely interesting about that now is that border between beauty and wellness is really blurring and there's a lot of crossover happening. But I think the number one mistake we see is brands want to be like another brand. And I've written about it, sameness. And I understand a little bit about why people do that because they're just maybe a little bit afraid. But any founder who started a brand is doing it for a reason. They woke up one morning or whatever, and they had this idea. And whether it's not there have been a scientist and they discovered something, or they are just a frustrated consumer and thought they could do it better, all those things matter. And I feel what happens is they just naturally get a little bit scared. And then other ones, they just see that, oh, those guys are like the unicorn. If we do what they're doing, we'll be a unicorn too. And it never works like that. Rarely, rarely, rarely works like that. And I think the brands that are out there that do succeed are the ones who just blaze their own trail. And it's not to say you can't follow trend, but there's got to be something at your core that is definitively yours. And that's the core truth. And that's the thing you can defend and nobody can touch. And without that, you're just another wannabe brand. And I don't think you're going to succeed. So
Yeah.
part of that shifting to that clutter is there's a lot of, like in any industry, there's a lot of clutter out there just because there's A lot of people trying to make money or do whatever, but the ones that rise to the top are the ones who are really trying to do something better, different, more sustainable, whatever it is. But there's a real reason for being.
Sure. So it, Skaggs' version of AI, or I guess Skaggs' branding of AI, is actual intelligence, right? And that's around the idea that AI sees the pattern, but you find the signal, right? How has integrating AI changed the pace and depth of what you guys deliver for your clients? And where do you still see the human hand staying in place?
Well, it's a couple of things. One is AI is certainly having an effect on the industry we're in, probably more so than most people expect. The problem is that AI does pattern recognition. That's its thing. The more it finds of the same thing, the more that becomes the norm, which means you basically are just finding the least common denominator. And I can't tell you how many times, even clients we work with, they send over, look what, this is what ChatGPT told us we should do this. But all you got to do is change the product name to another one. You're going to get the same exact output because if somebody did it last Tuesday and you're doing it this Tuesday and somebody did it 2 Tuesdays ago, you've just added to the same pattern that's sort of happening across it. So our interpretation was like, it's not going to go away and we're not going to let it kill us. So we're going to embrace it and we're going to let it do the things that take a tremendous amount of time. And then we're going to spend the time we save putting our own human brains to it after 2 decades of doing this and saying, that makes sense. That doesn't. That's an interesting idea. I would have never thought of. We should maybe pursue that and see where that goes. It's not doing it for you, and nobody should look at it as doing it for you. It's a tool. It's no different than when Photoshop hit the scene, right? Everybody thought it was the death of photographers. Da 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 da. It was just a tool that made the process better and faster. So as the guy behind the camera, you can spend more time there than
Right.
dealing with the non-fun stuff. So I think there's similarities to that. But I think it's really important that it's not going to solve the problem. It can't tell you what hasn't been said. And even with market research, it can't tell you why, when you walked up to the shelf, you grabbed that product and not that product. That is still something that's really important to do by talking to people. Like, what was it? What was the instinct? What was the impetus to make you grab that one and not that one? It can
Yeah.
certainly tell you that, 95% of people pick that one, but it's not going to tell you exactly why.
Why?
So
Yeah.
that's kind of why we just termed it actual intelligence, because we like to layer on what we know on top of what it's helping us figure out. So yeah, that's the idea.
Okay. Yeah, because when you think about that example that you just talked about, right? You walk into a pharmacy and there's a generic brand, similar colors as the name brand. To make that parody in your head psychologically, it's trying to create visual equivalence, right? That, hey, this is the name brand cough syrup and this is the generic cough syrup. It's the same thing.
Just one's
If
$2.50 more. Or maybe that's the
right.
decision. Or maybe it's just that the one that was the generic actually looked better and felt more trustworthy than the name brand. Who knows? That's the point, right? So I think there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, broadly, right? If you take the price out of the picture, then at the end of the day, it's, I guess the brand has told the story, right? Because a big name pharmacy is not going to go and try to advertise their cough syrup, whereas the company that only makes cough syrup or is one of their cornerstone products is going to tell the story and tie it to an outcome.
Yeah, it's that, or it might just be the way, what was the few words they put on the front of that box? Was it something you're already cued into about it doesn't contain something that you're aware of?
Mhm.
And that's the decision? Is it just the fact that cough syrup was written in a size that you could actually read? And do you know exactly what it was? Or, I mean, who knows? But there's 1,000 different reasons why people do what they do. But I'll go back to the fact that even at that point, it has a lot to do with what you did to get to that point in terms of building and messaging the brand, both visually and verbally.
Yeah. You have introduced the concept of AI visibility, measuring whether a brand's unfair advantage shows up accurately in what the LLMs are talking about, right? If, how they're presenting or what kind of uh, AEO, I guess, is happening around that brand's visibility. So most brand leaders have never thought about this. So when you first realized that it was a real problem, how severe is this gap that you're finding out?
Yeah, I want to be clear. I didn't introduce that concept. It's been out there, but it was something that we felt like brands need to be aware of this, because if they're not going to tell their story themselves the way they wanted to be told and really putting all the things that are important up front of it, it's going to sit there and scrape Reddit. It's going to scrape everything else it can find. And your brand story is eventually going to become what everybody else is saying it is rather than maybe what you want it to be. The problem is it's a really difficult thing to change once it's out there. It's not like SEO where you can start keywording stuff and all this, right? It's there. So
Yeah.
when we build Signal Check, which is a way for a brand, you put your URL and it'll tell you where you're leaking and where the pivot could be. It'll score how models see it. And again, it's a 30,000 foot reading, but it gives you an idea that either it's understanding and you've got something there and the way it's portraying the brand is correct or it's not. So
Yeah. Let's take another step into this, right? Into this concept. So tell us a little bit about this signal check and how does that help you help your clients when it comes to positioning or AI visibility as a whole?
I think most founders, and I would even say CMOs too, they're always kind of working in a box, if you know what I mean. And sometimes you have a team you can bounce ideas around and da 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 da. You got your friends. They usually tell you what you want to hear, though. Your family always tells you what you want to hear. But I think what happens is you get in this box and it's deep inside, maybe feel like something still isn't connecting. I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out. Or as a founder, I find that they can sometimes have a really difficult time getting the ideas out of their head onto paper. Signal Check was just a very basic tool to, like I said, put your URL in and it'll scan. It'll look at what the website's already saying. It'll look at what's been said in the press. It'll look about what's already been indexed across Google and things like this. And it will tell you where there's a leak, meaning where there's a gap between what the brand actually has and how they communicate. And I'm a big believer that is always the problem. Brands always have much more than they talk about. I don't know why. They bury it, on the about page or in a footnote or in a white paper, the thing that really makes them different. So Signal Check was just a way to try to surface that a little bit and not just say what it was, but also give an idea for a pivot. And again, it's a 30,000 foot read, but a lot of times people read it and they're like, wow, I've kind of thought maybe that was what was going on. And it just starts a conversation.
Yeah, that's very valuable.
Yeah, and step 2 of that is what we call a gap analysis, where we go much deeper with it. And there are 8 different dimensions that we score a brand against, not necessarily as a rating, but as a marker to determine here's where you are and we're trying to get to there. So here's what we got to do to close that down, to move you from being maybe a commodity brand into one that's more institutional, right? 8 dimensions, 4 different zones, 3 different types. So that's how it works.
That's awesome. So then logically, right, when we connect these dots,
Mm-hmm.
is there a remediation plan presented to the customer? Or once you've shown you've analyzed the 8 dimensions, you've looked at where they might be missing the mark or where they're burying some of their highlights, where they should actually surface them higher. How do you guys resolve this from a messaging standpoint, from a search visibility standpoint?
So the gap analysis tells you where the problem is and where you stand and what should happen. The third stage is then the brand essence study, which is where you get into really what the brand's about, like uncovering the core truth, the positioning, the verbal system. And the verbal system's really the most interesting part of it because you've seen it yourself. You go on a website, everybody talks the same way. And a lot of times they get caught up in all the promotional copy too. And I'm not saying promotions are wrong. You got to have them sometimes.
Right.
All you got to do is start to back it up with what the core truth says about it, right? And therefore, it just helps you step a little bit further than where most people are. And it's a sum of a parts is greater than the whole. So it's not that you just do one thing and it solves it. You've got to look at it across all these things together. But once that stage is done, then it's really clear what needs to happen. Okay, we need to redesign the website or we need to do this or the packaging needs an update or whatever it is. But at least now you know what you have and it's there. You've got it.
Yeah.
You've got a vocabulary, you've got a lexicon of words you do use, you have a lexicon of words you don't use. And it's all about just defending this core truth and pushing it. So,
Yeah. Thank you for that explanation. It kind of helps put the plan in perspective, step 1, step 2, step 3. That being said, what does an ideal client for Skags look like? Not just by category, but by mindset.
yeah, I mean, look, we've worked with fortunately, a lot of different brands across a lot of different industries over the years, and it's a lot of fun. And in the beginning, it was purposeful because we wanted to sort of understand, like maybe what they do in industry could be cross-pollinated into this industry, and it becomes innovative, and something different could happen, and a way to do it. Okay, the internet kind of equalized a lot of that, and social media has certainly influenced a lot of that too. So now I think what's the most exciting thing is just working with people who really have an idea and want to try it and are not afraid of having frank conversations about what needs to happen. It's very difficult to work with a client who just keeps saying, I want to be like that. I want to be like that. I want to be like that. Because it's like, what's the point then? If they're a scientist who's spent their career working on something, they've had a breakthrough and they've been able to patent it, and their problem is like they're talking in science geeky language. Okay, let's figure that out because that's interesting. It doesn't always have to be science. It could be anything. But therefore, it doesn't matter if it's a bottle of wine or a peptide or whatever it is, a lipstick. It doesn't matter because the functional idea and the foundational ideas are the same. It's just changing the names of the inset to maybe protect them in a sense, right? But it's all the same process-wise.
So, for sure. When you talk about, let's say you're qualifying somebody on whether you want to work with them or not, right? What's got to be true about the brand or the founder for that engagement to produce the kind of work that you're proud of?
And beauty, the product's got to be great. Actually, it's true with anything. If the product is terrible, or they've cut
Right.
the corners on it or whatever, everybody's going to see through it no matter what you do. So they've got to have a solid product, number one. And hopefully there's something about their development process or their material or what it does, a benefit or a feature that is also interesting and different. So it doesn't matter what the industry is. I think it comes back to what they're trying to achieve and what their goals are.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about the future a little bit, right? Near term. If you look at the next 12 to 18 months, if there was one problem that you could solve that would have the biggest compounding effect on everything else, what would it be? Whether it's pipeline or delivery capacity or geographic reach or just something totally different.
That's a really tough question because there's probably a lot of things about that. But I think for us right now, it's actually trying to get to this AI sort of perception that it's not the end all, that it's not
Mhm.
always right, that you've got to really question it because it will tell you what you want to hear, honestly. And unless you really push it and really start building your own skills and things that you put a lot of thought into it, it's not going to do what it's really good at. And I think right now that's just one, I think it's affecting a lot of industries, not just us. And I think you're starting to see it too about people pushing back on the slop. And I think eventually there will be a desire for authenticity again, that there's real truth. I think this line between truth and advertising is, if anything, it might be gone. It's becoming very, very hard to understand what's real and what's not, unless you're savvy and you're in it every day. But I think for the average consumer, I think it's a big problem. I think it's going to become a bigger problem. I don't have a solution to it, but the FCC and these guys, their plans around advertising, I wrote about this. They weren't designed for this. They were designed for TV. And it's very, very different now. And nobody's caught up with it from a regulatory point of view. So the fact you can go out and get a bunch of talking heads that are AI driven and give them a script and have them talk and make it look like it's real, that's ethically a big question to talk about. So I don't know.
Well, so this kind of reminds me of the little disclaimer you see in some ad. These are actors that are actually portraying an actual
Yeah.
customer
Yes.
testimony, right? So, how is that different from something like using a stand in to deliver a message?
It almost needs to be the same treatment, I think. That it needs to say, there needs to be some disclaimer that this portions of this are AI generated and da 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 da, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll be honest, we use AI. We've used AI generation for imagery to put products into different environments. But we also make a note that this is for demonstration purposes only. I just think it's not that hard to do. But I think a lot of brands, not even brands, that I don't know, brands, people, whatever, they just look at it as being like a way to move forward. And I think there's a big ethical issue there.
Yeah. So, does that seem like a problem that needs to be solved to have the biggest compounding effect? Or is
I
it more
think,
of an
yeah, I think it,
ethical?
yeah, I mean, not directly to us, but I think as an industry, as a consumer based as everybody, I think it's something that's important to look at. I mean, we get a little bit of a taste of it. We did with influencers, and okay, I always felt like influencers were it. We've had them forever, obviously, right? But influencers, in my experience, when they start, their brand becomes more important than the brands they're working for. That's when you
Hmm.
start to get into a lot of problems with them. And I think this is just an extension of that to a degree that I don't have the money or I don't have the budget to go out and do a $30,000 photo shoot. Then I'm going to do it this way. Okay, that's fine. That's a good excuse, but be honest about it. Like, it's all right. If you're just trying to show a glass on a table and to give an idea of proportion and size, material, color, whatever, what's wrong
Sure.
with that?
Yeah.
But if you have a talking head that looks real and it's saying something that you've given it to say and it's sounding like a real endorsement, I kind of have a problem with that personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can see how that kind of crosses a line, right? In terms of an ethical dilemma. When we look at your client roster, it almost looks like a prestige beauty hall of fame. Is that a ceiling or a launch pad?
I think it's a little bit of both, honestly. We've been very fortunate to work with the brands we've worked with over the years, and it's been a lot of fun, and I'm very proud of it. Unina too. Like, I think for us, that's been what we would define as success is just to be able to work at that level and that caliber of those kinds of brands. And a lot of them too, when we were working with them, they were at this sort of inflection points. And that's very exciting when you're there at that moment and they do cross that line and they become successful and you've had a finger or two in that. That's great. And as a launch pad, yes, of course, it certainly helps because people know these names. So it gives you some credibility off the bat. But nonetheless, regardless, you still got to prove yourself. Every brand's different. Every founder and everybody has their own goals. And it's what's can be frustrating sometimes is when you know it and they don't want to listen. And just you've seen it. I've seen it. They've seen it. They haven't seen it, but they do it anyhow. And then they fall on their own sword. And it's kind of like, you didn't have to do that. You could have done it slightly differently and not gone through all that, waste all that time and money.
On that note, right? Have y'all had any bloopers in the past that have kind of taught you guys lessons or building blocks or principles that you're like, hey, it was worth a shot, but we learned this and we should do this differently for the next client that is in a similar industry?
Yes, of course. And what's even more kind of disturbing is some of the stories we hear about people who have been somewhere else and have been burned. And then sadly, by the time they sometimes get to us, they've spent all their budget. So it's always a problem.
Mhm.
But I'm always appalled by these stories. Like, I don't know how these people go to sleep because it's unbelievable. $250,000 for a logo. I mean, that's just absurd,
Oh my God. Yeah.
right? And I'm not going to say who the agency was, big, famous, but that's just absurd. Like that $250,000, that's a lot of money for a young brand. And when you have MOQs for products, for packaging of things that are in the tens of thousands, and man, that money is necessary. And I just find it crazy. But yes, of course, we're always thinking out of the box a little bit and trying to push, but it's a very frank conversation. Like, we can try this. There's no guarantee it's going to work, but here's the way we can do it to sort of test it before we go all in and see what the response is. Social media is like the world's greatest, biggest, fastest mood board in the world, right? So you can put things out and you can test them and see what works and what doesn't. You can even couple AI with it a little bit now and kind of run some scenarios through it and see what it gives you back. So there's ways to sort of do it where you don't have to go out and back in the old days where you spend 6 months doing a campaign and ta-da, and then you watch it either go or fall, right? So
Yeah.
but again,
Yeah.
it's about just, I think, again, coming back to that foundational question and really thinking about where the brand is and wants to go and what are the ways to get there. Because I would much rather spend the money on what the brand needs in terms of like getting the inventory and the stock and the formulation right, because that's what matters in the end.
Mhm.
Of course, awareness is the biggest obstacle of it all. But again, if you have the awareness of a crappy product, what's the point? So they go hand in hand.
For sure. Have you guys looked to deepen into other categories or adjacent categories, right? Such as human health, food and bev, fashion. Where do you see the white space?
But actually, pre-pandemic, we did a lot of work in the hospitality and food and beverage space. And I loved it. It was a lot of fun. Like the pandemic changed a lot of that. Restaurants are fun. The fringe benefits, of course, are great, but they're extremely competitive. and the margins are razor thin. So it's a real tough one to work in. And I feel like I still would do it. It's still fun. But our sweet spot, we found it. We fell into this beauty, fragrance, cosmetic color cosmetics, human health space. And I like that a lot. But we've worked everybody from NASA to Microsoft to the Estee Lauders to everybody in between. And so I'm very fortunate about that and happy about that. But I don't know that I think the white space for us right now is just helping brands really get beyond where they're stuck. And I think we're good at that. And we've been good at that.
Yeah, that's good. When you look at business development or attracting the right clients at the right stage, what's working and where does it feel like you're leaving opportunity on the table, whether it's content, thought leadership, outreach, or something else?
Well, there's a lot of agencies out there. There's a lot of creatives out there. There's a lot of really good creatives out there. There's also a lot of brands out there, but not everybody's for everyone, right? So you still got to do that sift. Yeah, we've made a bit of a push in the last year to do more. I don't know if it's so much thought leadership as much as it's just trying to take this idea of the gap and closing the gap and make it tangible in the sense of looking at things that have happened in the past or happening now and explaining like this is what we're talking about. I don't know that what we're proposing in terms of our methodology is groundbreaking or revolutionary. I'm not trying to make it that, but I think it is a different approach, a unique approach. And I think it's a little bit difficult for people to wrap their head around it because it isn't the normal, oh, you need a brand strategy. Well, of course you need a brand strategy. I mean, duh. But how are you going to get to that strategy? And what's that strategy built upon? I think a lot of times they go right to that. And you feel a lot of times when it comes down to like, okay, it's time for content creation. And what are they making? Because there's nothing to go back on to pull from to say, look, that's our core truth. Therefore, our content should be developed around this. And we should have people doing this and that and talk about this and photograph that and these sorts of things. So yeah, I think that's kind of where it ends up now.
Yeah. You'll be surprised when through this podcast journey of at least in the second season, right? I've talked to so many leaders like you that are at the top of their creative game. They're delivering great outcomes for a lot of the big brands that they work with. But one thing that I have noticed that on their own uh, brand social, there is a lot less frequency in how much they post about, and it's not necessarily about wins, right? It could be concepts, creating the engagement and the thought leadership from an agency perspective. That, hey, look, we had this new brand that was a cosmetic brand that came into the market. And I saw some on your Instagram. I've seen some of the brands where you not only did the campaign, but you also worked on the packaging aspect, right? So I think that's kind of where I was trying to see if what would you tell them, right? If you could tell young marketers out there that are starting to see a little bit of success with some customers, or even those that have been around for a while and been around the block several times, right? What would you tell them with regards to how do you build that trust asset, whether it's content, thought leadership, frequency, consistency?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it comes back to their own core truth, right? And talking about that. Yeah, it's true too. Yeah, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. It's a real balancing act. I think it's probably like parenting. Your kids take a lot more time than you would ever think, and you still got to balance that with your own social life and your professional life.
Yeah.
Being a founder or anything like that, it's the same kind of role, right? You have to nurture, you have to give it time, you have to put effort into it. Nothing happens quickly. Nothing is cheap. It's an investment. It's an investment in money. It's an investment in time. It's an investment in personal feeling too. So I think the people who do it right are the ones who are just damn serious about it. And they understand the commitment it takes. And honestly, all the founders I know who've actually succeeded, they are driven, like massively driven. It's not a hobby, and it's easy to
Yeah.
see out it. With the ones who are, I don't like getting the email Saturday night at 11 o'clock, but that person is serious and that's different. So I think doing a brand, it's a massive, like I said, commitment, and it's all consuming. It always takes a lot longer and much more blood, sweat, and tears than most people ever think.
Yeah.
But I think as a guy, like in my role, or even the ones who are starting out or who are getting some traction and stuff, telling that story is good. It's important for people to understand that you're not just there to provide a service. You're there to provide direction and leadership and
Yeah.
ideas and thoughts. And And like I said, you get to a point in your career where then you become a bit of a therapist and like it'll be okay. You just kind of don't jump out the window yet. Like it's okay. We'll get there. And because it's hard, you know?
Yeah. With this specific topic, right? If we tie this back to the Skags AI that you guys have built,
Yeah.
right? Does your own brand get the same strategic attention that you give your clients, or is it the cobbler's shoes problem?
I'll be very honest. For a lot of years, it was cobbler's shoes because we were still young, but we were trying to grow. And it was a busy time. The agency was much, much bigger than it was now. And we were by coastal and it was, and honestly, we didn't have to worry about it much because we had so much word of mouth. But as time has gone on, it's more something I want to do because I find it fun, first of all. And I realized at the end of last year, like I've got a lot to say. I need to start talking about it. And all the platforms and tools are there now to do it. And it's not really so much for business development or something, not as much as I just see things and I've seen things that I just annoy me. And I don't understand like why do they keep making these mistakes and why do brands keep doing these things? And when I know they don't have to. And it's really, I don't know, maybe I take it too personally. I don't know, but I just feel like it's like watching a slow motion train wreck. Like you just see it coming and it's like, you don't have to do it. And so that's kind of the reason to start talking more about it and
Yeah.
be there. Take it for what it's worth, you know?
You kind of reminded me of a couple, we won't name names, but some insurance companies that have the most obnoxious commercials, right? And you want to hate them, but they keep going. You're like, man, I thought the last one was the dumb one. You've like knocked it out of the park with this next one.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it's like bad publicity or what do you call it? The stupid message is still a message and it stays.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like bad PR is good. It's still PR, right?
Right.
No, it's, yeah, that's not
Right.
the way you want to do it, but yes, true. But I mean, like the little Geico guy, right? Like that is absolute 100% owned brand. They
Correct.
own that, right? And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter where you are, how fast you're driving, what you're doing, you see it, you know immediately what it is. And
Yep.
that's the goal in a way, in a lot of ways. Now, whether or not they can back it up with customer service and that's a whole nother game. But in terms of own brand identity, as one of the things we're trying to build, that's a good example because it is recognizable. And, it's like when Target, like just went to the Target with no word, no name at all. Wow. That's
Right.
iconic. Well, now you're institutional because you don't have to know it. You just know it from what you've seen. And there's very
For
few
sure.
brands that can pull that off, right?
Yep. Golden Arches, another one. Everybody knows that. So when you're running a high touch founder led studio like yours, that definitely means that time is most finite resource that you have, right? What are some tasks and processes that consume, a large part of your time or day that don't directly produce billable value or creative output? And how are you addressing those?
There is this trend, I guess you could call it, but where it used to be people would manage a project through email.
Mhm.
Now it's being managed through text. And it's an incredibly huge waste of time. It's difficult to find things. You can't have multiple threads. All these sorts of things go into it. And while it's super easy to fire it off, it just
Mhm.
compounds into all kinds of problems down the road because, well, I texted you. Yeah, okay. You also texted me 500 things and this guy's texting me too and da da da. So a long, long time ago, and actually the pandemic helped, that actually proved in like just solidifying processes for managing projects where there's 24/7 visibility on it. There's a paper trail of what happens. So everybody knows how the decision is made, when, those sorts of things. And I don't know why the effort not to spend more time on that doesn't exist for more. And there's a lot of tools out there that help you do project management. But I find a lot of those too try to be everything to everybody. And so you get a lot of bloatware and they're just difficult to use because they're trying to do it for everything. So I think you've got to have some of these processes in place just to manage how the project rolls. Because if not,
Yeah,
that'll cost you so much in the end. And
for
trying to
sure.
do it fast and quick by just firing off a text doesn't work.
Yeah. I noticed on your website, there's a section called conversations, right? So when I look at that, right, it tells me that you're thinking about own media and long form dialogue channel. What role do you see that playing in how you guys attract clients and build authority? And what's holding you back from going further?
Result of what we were talking about earlier of getting to the point where I just feel like we need to talk about more things. We've seen a lot. And I don't want people to fall in the same traps that I've seen. And nor does Yamina, right? It's important to us. We have some other ideas coming down the pipe, but it's just a question of time always. And clients come first. So as much as I want to start a podcast, I can't do it until I really have some time to dedicate to it.
Right.
And I can't do it because the clients are taking the time. But I figured, why not be on podcasts like with you and other people and start having these conversations that we want to talk about and give it a home on the website, start adding our own content into it as well, at least in written form, and eventually build it out. I think it's just important to talk. I mean, we're in the communications world, actually.
Yeah.
It's visual sometimes and it's verbal, but that's what we ultimately do. And there's just so much going on now. And there's just so much noise that it's really hard to, I think, for a lot of brands to focus. And if we can give them a couple nuggets, like I said, here or there to make their life a little more interesting and more efficient, then let's do that.
Absolutely. When you zoom out and you kind of look at the next 5 years or just let's say longer term, right?
Yeah.
Do you still see Skags as a tight founder led studio, or is there a version of this that scales?
Right now, I see it as still a very tight thing. And if we wanted to scale, we could. But the idea of scaling, I think it's very different now than it used to be. The pandemic taught us that remote work does work. And yes, after the pandemic, we went back to the studio and we found it was important to be able to get around a table together with pencils and paper and draw and work stuff out. That is the hardest thing to solve in the virtual sense. But to have a connected network of people around the world now, it's no problem. And in some ways, it can be more efficient because while you're sleeping, the other guys in half the world are busy doing work. So you wake up in the morning, this bit's done. Now you can do your handoff, and it really becomes a real continuous process. But again, I think in the creative space, that need to get together and sit down around a table with pencil and paper and draw is important. And so you figure that out. Right?
How do you do that with some of the folks that are not in the same office or the same country? Do you guys still do whiteboarding sessions or creative briefs that span shared workspaces? Use technology to do that
Yeah,
type of stuff?
of course, all of that. Yamina especially is a big proponent that every project starts with pencil and paper. The computer is a tool again.
Right.
And
Right.
I sometimes worry about what young kids learn in school and they don't know how to draw. And it's kind of sad. And they immediately go into computer because the computer as a tool wants precision. That's what it's trying to
Right.
give you. And in the beginning of a project, that's not what you want. You want loose, you want ideas, you want things to flow, you want to explore and see what's out there. So I think the sketchbook is still a very real thing. I think the feel of paper and pencil is still one of my favorite things. Maybe I'm old, but I think it's true.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, even if you have a Zoom session where you're drawing and you're showing it to one another, and it just needs that dialogue.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're going to come through something, well, wow, that's kind of a cool idea. Note that one and keep going. But
Absolutely.
and I think what I'm trying to say is like, you have to learn how to leverage technology for what it can do for you, not what you wants you to do. Right. So I think that's just really important.
Yeah. Let's just say in a past life, right? I heard this said a lot, right? Do you want the tool to do what the business needs it to do, or does the business have to fit to what the tool can provide?
I think it's the first one.
Right? Exactly.
Because every business is different and every use case is different. I mean, that's obvious, right? But it's amazing at how many platforms out there and stuff just try to do everything for everybody and then it doesn't do anything because, well, it's like a jack of all trades and a
Right.
master of none. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a platform called Basecamp we've used since day one. And
Mhm.
I loved it because it was just absolute stripped down, just threaded conversation with files, right? That's all you need.
Mhm.
They just pushed an update, which I have a lot of problems with, but they just stuck in their lane. They just did one thing really, really good and it worked magnificently well. You can jump in there and you can have different threads so everybody can see what's going on. Slack has kind of done that a little bit now, but the problem with Slack is sort of the internal versus external world. And not everything you're doing needs to be external. So there's some room there to possibly improve, but I don't know.
I love how you put that because threading is very important for AI as well, right? In terms of context preservation. And with the MCP connectivity, right, whether it's from Claude or for GPT or whoever, when you connect those into, let's say, your Slack thread, like you've got a Slack channel, one per client, you've got one channel per client where everything lives in there. I think that's where you can leverage more of the power of the tool to keep organization on point, to capture anything that was missed by a human in a conversation. Even for producing this podcast, right? We use it heavily for making sure that did we capture the right segments, or how many key topics did we generate from it so that we could put out the relevant content. So uh, when you look at preserving your essence at Skags 5 years out, are there any types of partnerships, infrastructure that would help you guys preserve the essence, but still move in that direction where you can deliver more with less?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think one thing we're all going to start to face, maybe we already faced it. I sometimes feel it myself, is that the output from AI can be overwhelming. And
Hmm.
you can end up spending just as much time trying to sift through what you popped in your head at midnight when you're laying in bed on your phone. Wow. Then, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I think MCPs are like such a cool thing. And they've changed the way even we update our own website and stuff like this, is just streamlining it, right? It's faster and better and all kinds of things. But yeah, I don't know. I think you've just got to build a stack that works for you. And
Yeah.
you've got to be also sort of responsible enough not to let the next shiny thing pull you
Right.
another way, because as a tech guy too, it's always something
It's
new.
very easy.
And you can just get sucked in so many different ways. And in the end, you end up with a stack that's crazy. And half the team doesn't get this. The other half team is upset because of that. And da, 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 da. And so being able to sort of prune it back and be very clear about the tools we use and what each tool is for and why, I think it's super important. And especially when you start interfacing externally, people don't have time and their attention spans are like a gnat. And you just gotta like be clear.
Yeah. Well, no, this has been awesome. Before we wrap, is there any question you wish more people asked you about the work or belief about brand strategy that you hold that most of the industry still has cut up?
No, not really. I guess there's one question. It's like, why is the foundation so important? I mean, I know that sounds really basic and fundamental. Sorry for the pun, but I don't know. I just feel like there's just so much Me Too brand out there of trying to be like everybody else. And I just wish more people actually wouldn't even ask me, would just ask themselves, like, is this really the right thing to be doing? That's my job, is to sort of watch this stuff. But I think people see it when they walk into the store. The trends come and trends go, and great brands outlive the trends. And so I don't know that there's one question that somebody should ask me more than others. I think all questions are interesting based on where a brand is and its growth patterns, what they're struggling with, and where they're trying to go. Those are the questions I like to answer.
Perfect. Well, Bradley, thank you so much for taking time towards the end of your day and just talking about geeking out about what it takes to run a successful agency and how you achieve success with the brands that you serve. And happy that you could be part of this journey with the podcast. And we'll look forward to having you again with some more stories, some more wins, and sharing some more lessons in the future.
Cool.
So
Well, thank you very much for
I
having me.
appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.